Twilight swallows the ice in silence. The air is dry and bitter, the kind that tightens skin and stings the lungs. A hunter crouches low, moving slowly across the blue-white plain of the frozen sea. The horizon wavers with haze and frost. In the far distance, a dark smudge, breathing. A seal resting near its breathing hole. The hunter pauses, belly to ice, waiting. Hours pass. His fingers are numb. The seal is still. He waits longer. Then, motion. He rises, harpoon raised. A crack, a plunge. The ice shifts beneath him. This is not a myth. This was work. In the year 1000, one of the most dangerous professions required no armor, no kings, no written record. It was seal hunting on the frozen margins of human habitation. Greenland, Arctic Canada, the Siberian North. To hunt alone on the sea ice meant pushing one's body and senses into near hibernation, existing in a strange dance with prey that could vanish at the smallest vibration. Among the Thule people, ancestors of today's Inuit, hunting was a science woven with spirit. By 1000 CE, the Thule had begun expanding eastward from Alaska into Canada and Greenland, replacing the older Dorset culture. They brought with them the kajak, kayak, the umiak, skin boat, and advanced harpoon technology, tools not of leisure but survival. Their way of life depended on precision and silence. A poorly timed breath could shatter the hunt. Mainstream archaeology confirms the Thule's mastery of sea mammals. Their winter villages often clustered near leads in the sea ice, places where open water appeared year-round. From there, hunters would crawl across the frozen crust, sometimes for miles, to locate and stalk seals surfacing for air. One successful strike could feed a family for days. But failure wasn't just disappointing, it was life-threatening. Some oral traditions speak of hunters who never returned, not lost to blizzards, but taken by the spirits of the animals they stalked. Quirky charms like carved ivory figures or beads made from raven bones were carried to appease the spirits, small, ancient apologies. In some regions, it was believed that if a hunter disrespected a seal, killed it carelessly, left its eyes exposed to the cold, it would curse him, turning the ice soft beneath his steps. Scholars still debate whether these rituals were literal belief systems or metaphors for environmental ethics, whether taboos rules to keep ecosystems balanced, or warnings wrapped in stories, ensuring caution in a world where overconfidence meant death. Either way, the seal hunter was more than a provider. He was part of a pact, with nature, with community, with myth. And every time he crept across the ice, he tested the strength of that pact. We often think of danger in the year 1000 as swords and arrows, sieges and betrayals. But out here, the battle was with silence, temperature and time. No crowd cheered, no chronicler watched, just a man, a harpoon and a hole in the ice. And sometimes, the ice blinked first. High above the surf, where jagged cliffs punched through the fog like broken teeth, two men inch their way down a rope made of twisted sinew and hair. The wind howls, waves slam against the rock hundreds of feet below. Their fingers, raw and cracked, grip a ledge no wider than a boot. But they don't pause. They're here for treasure, the precious eggs of seabirds nesting in the crags. One misstep, one gust, and they vanish into the void swallowed by the Atlantic. Bird egg collecting on cliffs may not sound like a profession, but in some parts of the world in the year 1000 it was a lifeline. On the Faroe Islands in Iceland, and later recorded in St Kilda, Scotland, communities survived in part by harvesting bird eggs and fledglings during nesting season. The tradition likely goes back centuries earlier, and in the year 1000 it was already deeply embedded in the seasonal rhythms of survival. In the Andes of South America, similar practices unfolded on the opposite side of the globe. Highland peoples climbed sheer rock faces to steal eggs from condors and other nesting birds, sometimes believed to hold spiritual power. These high-risk egg harvests were both practical and symbolic, protein and ritual combined. In the Faroes, climbers targeted guillemots, puffins and kittiwakes, descending coastal cliffs using ropes made from plaited horsehair, seaweed or even hide. They carried small pouches to cradle the eggs, fragile as breath. Falling was common, so was being hit by protective birds, who attacked eyes and hands with beaks sharpened by instinct. These weren't gentle foraging expeditions, they were missions into vertical danger. The men who undertook them were often unmarried, or without heirs, not by accident. Their loss, while tragic, wouldn't destabilize family lines. A grim calculation, perhaps, but one rooted in communal logic. Death wasn't rare, yet so was success, measured in dozens of eggs that could feed a village or be traded inland. One odd tale from Iceland tells of a boy who refused to eat eggs because he believed his father's soul had entered a gull after a fatal fall. Whether true or not, it reflects the mystical tangle between humans and nature in these death-defying tasks. And here's the scholarly tangle. Some researchers argue these egg hunters weren't professionals in the modern sense, but rotating volunteers or seasonal daredevils. Others believe they were specialists, trained from youth, celebrated like tightrope walkers in the court of the wind. Scholars still debate whether cliff foraging was communal duty or status performance, a primitive profession or an act of sacred devotion. But what's not in doubt is the risk. With no harnesses, no backups and no safety nets, every collection became a tightrope act without the rope. We often think of height as thrill, bungee jumps, mountaintop photos, plane windows. But in the year 1000, altitude was currency and cliff faces were pantries. The men who hung between sky and stone weren't adventurers. They were just hungry. And somewhere, carved into the base of an unmarked cliff, a bird's cry still echoes. Echoes for the climbers who never came back. A man lights a torch deep underground. The flame flickers against walls glistening with damp mineral veins. The air is thick, heavy, and tastes of salt and dust. With each breath his lungs burn. Around him the sound of picks echoes, sharp, rhythmic, desperate. One wrong swing and the ceiling might collapse. But there is no turning back. Salt is life, and death is close. In the year 1000, mining was not an industry. It was a gamble with mortality. Among the most perilous of these ventures were the salt mines of the Sahara and the illicit grave diggings of central China. Both involved digging into the earth, often illegally or under exploitative conditions, for things the surface world valued far more than the lives of those who retrieved them. In the central Sahara, near what is now Tau Deni in northern Mali, salt slabs were carved out of the earth under grueling conditions. The area was so remote and dry that water had to be transported in by camel. Workers, often enslaved, chiselled massive salt blocks from the earth and hauled them across hundreds of kilometres to markets in Timbuktu and beyond. The salt wasn't just seasoning, it was currency. It preserved meat, balanced diets, and fueled entire trade routes. A single camel's load could be worth a man's life. The dangers were many: cave-ins, dehydration, inhalation of fine salt dust that scarred the lungs, and suffocation from sudden collapses. The mines had no support beams, no air shafts, no medical care. The only certainty was fatigue. Half a world away, another kind of dangerous digging was taking place, this time not for food, but forbidden knowledge. In Song Dynasty China, the grave robbers of the northern plains were often peasants turned night thieves, burrowing into royal and noble tombs that dated back centuries. These tombs promised jade, lacquerware, and gold, but they were also riddled with booby traps, collapsing corridors, and sometimes toxic gases. One fringe but fascinating detail: some grave robbers reportedly carried roosters into tombs. The idea was that if the rooster suddenly died or cried out, the air was poisoned or cursed. Whether this was genuine superstition or an early form of gas detection remains a lively point of speculation. Scholars still debate whether the majority of early Chinese grave robbers were driven by desperation, organised crime, or even employed unofficially by corrupt nobles who wanted treasures without direct blame. The ethics were murky, but the danger was clear. Disturbing the dead was taboo, punishable by death if caught, and deadly if done poorly. Meanwhile, in both the Sahara and China, those who dared to dig too deep did so in near total anonymity. No names recorded, no memorials left. Only the pathways of ancient tunnels and broken tools remain. We might think of mining today in terms of hard hats and mechanized drills, but in the year 1000, it was sweat, shadows, and superstition. Men bled for salt, they suffocated for gold, and somewhere beneath the earth, their ghosts may still stir, waiting perhaps for their next trespasser. The battlefield is quiet now, just the crows circling. But hours ago it was alive with steel, hooves, and the howling of men who knew this might be their final breath. A bloodied warrior kneels, gripping the hilt of a broken sword. His face is painted, not with war paint, but with sweat and ash. In his world, to die well is the only guarantee of a name remembered. And to live? That is another kind of risk entirely. In the year 1000, to make a living by the sword was not romantic, it was relentless. Professional warriors existed across the world. Norse raiders in Scandinavia, samurai in Heian Japan, Ghazi fighters on the fringes of the Islamic world, and armoured riders of the Byzantine frontier. Each had different codes, creeds, and customs, but all shared a common reality. Theirs was the job that demanded you die to succeed. Let's start in Japan. In the late Heian period, the concept of the samurai was solidifying. Though the samurai class wouldn't fully blossom until the 12th century, the precursors were already forming. A warrior aristocracy bound by oaths of loyalty, land holdings, and a brutal expectation of battlefield prowess. These were not just soldiers, they were enforcers, courtiers, assassins, and sometimes poets. One documented warrior of the period, Taira no Masakado, famously led a rebellion in the 930s and declared himself new emperor in eastern Japan. He was hunted and killed, his head displayed in Kyoto, but his name echoed for centuries. In the Norse world, warriors travelled by longship, raiding coasts from England to the Caspian Sea. While not every Norseman was a raider, those who were often made a profession of it. Seasonal attacks, ransom schemes, mercenary contracts. Some returned home rich, others never returned. One quirky detail: runestones in Sweden commemorate fallen warriors with surprisingly intimate lines like, "He died in the east, pray for his soul." These stones are scattered reminders that glory didn't always translate to survival. Even in the Islamic world, warriors were often far from their homelands. Ghazi fighters, semi-nomadic holy warriors, pushed against the Byzantine Empire, seeking both conquest and religious merit. They rode on promises of divine reward, but also faced starvation, desertion, and death in alien lands. What ties them together is this: their lives were often shorter, their deaths often brutal, and their legacies largely dependent on the scribes of others. A warrior might fight 10 battles and still die unnamed, or die in his first and become legend. Scholars still debate whether these men truly chose this life, or were born into roles from which escape was impossible. Was the warrior's path a calling, or the only option available to the landless and the desperate? Evidence varies. In some cases, second sons without inheritance turned to the sword. In others, elite boys were raised from birth to master weapons before language. And despite their martial glamour, these fighters often lived under constant strain, emotional, physical, and spiritual. In Japan, failing to protect one's lord could lead to ritual suicide. In Europe, dishonor on the battlefield could mean social exile. So, when we picture the warrior of the year 1000, we should see not just a fighter, but an employee of fate, paid in land or loot, trained to kill, and always walking the line between revered and replaceable. Because in this job, even success meant scars. A splash, then silence. The water swallows the sound. Beneath the surface, it's a different world, dark, heavy, ancient. A man kicks downward, lungs burning, eyes searching the seabed for a glimmer of something round and white. Pearl. Maybe. Or maybe nothing. He's tied to a stone for ballast, the only thing pulling him down fast enough. No mask, no tank, just breath and muscle. He has 1 minute before the sea decides to keep him. In the year 1000, diving was among the most brutal and least forgiving professions. Across the coasts of India, Persia, East Africa, and even parts of Europe, freedivers risked everything for treasures buried in the deep. Pearls, Coral, sponges, and even sunken goods from shipwrecks were all part of a strange submerged economy. But the real currency was time, measured in heartbeats, held breath, and how long a man could stay conscious while the ocean crushed him from all sides. Let's start with the pearl divers of the Persian Gulf and the Indian coast. Mainstream historical sources describe a thriving pearl industry stretching back centuries. By the 10th century, records mention fleets of divers setting out during peak seasons, each man diving dozens of times a day. There are no goggles. Divers often rubbed their eyes with special salves, mixtures of herbs and fish oils, to reduce sting and improve underwater vision. They descended holding stones or weighted baskets, then tugged a rope to be hauled up by crewmates. It wasn't just drowning they feared. Shallow water blackouts were common, when a diver's brain simply shuts down from lack of oxygen before he reaches the surface. Sharks were a threat too, especially around coral-rich waters. Some divers wore rudimentary body nets or charms against bites, though these offered more comfort than real protection. Farther north, in Anglo-Saxon England, eeling was an entirely different but equally suffocating trade. Eel traps and nets were placed in rivers and estuaries, but some men took to the water with bare hands, slipping through reed-thick marshes in pursuit of the slick, elusive fish. Monasteries prized eels for food and trade, and so the best eel catchers became minor local legends, men who could hold their breath, feel with their toes, and wrestle a dozen wriggling beasts into woven baskets. One fringe tale even tells of an eel catcher who trained his dog to dive with him. Though most scholars treat that as colourful folklore, scholars still debate whether the extreme divers of this era were specialists, trained from boyhood, or if diving was simply a desperate trade, taken up by those with no better options. In regions where pearls fetched royal prices and monasteries demanded aquatic delicacies, the line between forced labour and honoured skill could blur quickly. What's consistent across cultures is the cost. Burst eardrums, waterlogged lungs, eye infections, spinal damage. These were the slow injuries of a fast trade. Divers who survived their prime years often suffered quietly, their bodies worn from the weight of the sea. And yet there was beauty too. A single perfect pearl could secure a season's worth of food. A rare sponge could be sold to apothecaries for medicine. These weren't luxuries for the divers themselves, but the promise of escape, a flicker of light in the dark water. So we remember the breathless harvest not just for its danger, but for its strangeness, a job where silence reigned, depth mattered more than distance, and every shift ended gasping for air beneath a sunlit sky. The air smells of sulphur, thick, acrid and alive. Beneath the vast jagged slope of cooled lava, men move like shadows in the steam. One slips, then recovers, wiping ash from his brow. Another hammers at the brittle rock with a bone-handled tool, releasing a hissing plume. His skin is blistered, his eyes burn, but he keeps working. The volcano is not quiet today, but the tools of empires depend on its rage. Mining volcanoes was one of the most volatile occupations in the year 1000. Across the globe, obsidian, the glass-like volcanic stone used for blades, mirrors and ritual objects, was still in high demand. And in certain regions, sulphur was harvested directly from the smoking craters of active volcanoes, used in medicine, alchemy, and early gunpowder mixtures. Both materials required descending into the living mouth of the earth. And the earth didn't always let them back out. In Mesoamerica, obsidian was essential. At sites like Pachuca in central Mexico, ancient quarry pits show signs of continued use well into the post-classic period, around and after 1000 CE. The Aztecs would later revere Pachuca's green obsidian for its purity, but even before them, the stone shaped everyday life: knives, tools, arrowheads. It was sharper than steel, capable of cutting on a molecular level, and it came from the heart of volcanoes. Quarrying it meant hacking at razor-sharp stone, often without gloves or boots, where a slip could slice muscle to the bone. Workers navigated unstable slopes, dodged landslides, and hauled sacks of obsidian shards down mountains with no harness, no pack animals, and no second chances. Meanwhile, in places like Java, Sulfur was already being collected near crater rims, though the more formal sulfur mining in places like Kawaijen would explode centuries later. Early reports and later traditions suggest local peoples knew of the material's strange properties long before European chemistry gave it a name. They used it in balms, to cure skin ailments, and, more dangerously, in early experiments with fire and fume. The method was crude: break chunks loose with poles, wrap them in cloth, and carry them away before the choking fumes overwhelmed you. One fringe detail from a medieval Arabic manuscript refers cryptically to a mountain that burns from within, where men wear the skins of beasts to carry its breath in barrels. Scholars can't confirm the exact location, but some interpret it as an early description of sulfur mining, perhaps in Sicily or the Arabian Peninsula, where foul gases had to be trapped in sealed containers for later use in alchemical recipes. Scholars still debate whether these early volcano workers were skilled artisans or expendable labourers. Were they specialists called in from afar, or villagers forced by necessity to chip away at danger? In many regions there's evidence of both. Trained obsidian knappers working near settlements, and lower-class porters risking their lives for the material's transport. But whatever their rank, the risk was real. Volcanic gases could kill in minutes, obsidian could maim for life, and sometimes the mountain simply erupted. We often speak of volcanoes in myth, wrathful gods, fiery tempers, but in the year 1000 they were workplaces. And the men who walked their slopes weren't heroes or villains. They were employees of the fire, punching in each day with a prayer and a pickaxe, and when they didn't come home, the mountain didn't notice. A rider crests the ridge alone, cloak snapping in the wind. Behind him lies familiar land, ahead uncertainty. His satchel holds no weapons, only scrolls, perhaps a carved relic or a coded map. He's an envoy or a monk or a scholar, sent not to conquer but to connect. Yet the dangers he faces are no less real. The road ahead is riddled with wolves, some on 4 legs, many on 2. In the year 1000, there were no passports, no embassies, no digital backups. Those who travelled between worlds, whether to carry messages, faith or knowledge, took on a job as dangerous as any frontline soldier. Messengers, missionaries and map makers all lived on the knife edge of geopolitics, weather and suspicion. Start with messengers. The Abbasid Caliphate, still clinging to influence in Baghdad, relied on human couriers to maintain contact across its splintering dominion. These men, often literate and multilingual, were trusted to carry orders, gifts or warnings over vast deserts and contested frontiers. They weren't just at risk from brigands. The mere suspicion that they carried information could get them detained, tortured or worse by rival rulers. In Christian Europe, papal envoys travelled between kingdoms and abbeys, often with critical documents in hidden compartments sewn into their robes. The Church depended on these couriers to keep ecclesiastical authority intact, especially in regions where feuding warlords made formal governance nearly impossible. One recorded case in 998 tells of a papal agent found dead near the Alps, stripped of his vestments and burned with his parchment still clutched in one hand. Then came the missionaries. In the north, Christian monks pushed into pagan Scandinavia armed with relics, liturgy and little else. Many were welcomed, others were not. The famous saga of Ansgar, Apostle of the North, tells of earlier missions in the 9th century, but by the year 1000, similar journeys were still underway, sometimes into places where crosses were seen as threats, not salvation. Meanwhile, in the east, Buddhist monks continued their treks across the Silk Road. Though the great age of Tang-era exchange was fading, some still crossed into Central Asia, navigating fractured trade routes and hostile tribes. Their goal wasn't gold, but transmission of wisdom, sutras, mandalas, practices. One fringe tradition describes a monk who hid texts inside hollowed gourds, slung from his waist, because paper was too risky to carry openly. Some say he vanished in the desert, his gourds never found. And then there were the map makers, early geographers who dared to sketch the world without Google Earth. Al-Biruni, born in 973, wrote extensively about India and theorized about Earth's rotation with startling precision. But others who attempted such work lacked his status or protection. To chart a territory was, in some places, to commit espionage. To measure a people's land was to invite violence. Scholars still debate whether these travellers were seen as heroes, spies, or fools. The answer depends on where they arrived and who answered the door. Some were granted safe passage, others were stoned, imprisoned, or quietly made to disappear. What unites them is motive. They didn't travel for loot or conquest, but for connection between cities, cultures, beliefs. They carried the weight of information long before the printing press or post office, and they often bore that weight alone. So when we imagine the perils of the medieval world, we should remember these wanderers. Not warriors, not kings, just men with messages, maps, manuscripts, and a willingness to walk into the unknown. Snow falls gently across a silent forest. The branches sag under its weight. Somewhere between the trees, faint footprints press into the white, then vanish. A hunting party returns with full sleds, but one man is missing. They wait. Hours pass, night falls, no sign. Days later, they find his spear near a blood-stained patch of snow. No tracks in, no tracks out. Just a stillness too complete to be natural. In the far north, among the Sami of Lapland, the Evenki of Siberia, and the Inuit of Arctic Canada and Greenland, stories circulate, not of the prey that got away, but of the hunter who never returned. The most dangerous job wasn't just about the cold, the animals, or the starvation. Sometimes it was about the things that couldn't be explained. The curses, the spirits, the moments when nature seemed to close around a person and erase them. By the year 1000, these hunting cultures had already refined generations of knowledge into survival strategies, routes passed down orally, rules for handling carcasses, rituals before and after the kill. The hunter wasn't simply a laborer, he was a liminal figure, walking between the world of humans and the world of beasts. In Greenland, both Inuit and Norse settlers believed in unseen forces tied to the land and sea. A hunter who disrespected the balance, killing too much, wasting a kill, mocking the prey, might suffer unnatural consequences. One Norse account from the 11th century tells of a man who returned from the ice with hair turned white and speech lost after spending a single night alone near a seal colony. The community called him ice-struck. He never recovered. Among the Sami, the Noadi, or spiritual leader, played a crucial role in rebalancing a disturbed relationship between hunter and landscape. But sometimes even ritual couldn't help. A quirky Sami tradition involved tying small metal charms to a hunter's boots, not for luck, but to make just enough noise to avoid catching the attention of malevolent forest spirits who preferred silence. In Siberian shamanic lore, certain animals were thought to be more than animals. The black bear, for example, might be a spirit in disguise, testing the hunter's humility. If the hunter showed arrogance or fear, the bear would curse him. This wasn't metaphorical. Hunters spoke of real deaths, inexplicable illnesses, tools going missing in impossible ways. Some villages believed that certain woods should never be hunted in after sundown, not because of walls, but because the trees themselves remember. Scholars still debate whether these beliefs were symbolic, spiritual, or proto-psychological responses to trauma and loss. Were they cautionary tales designed to reinforce survival ethics, or genuine interactions with what these cultures considered a living, sentient landscape? Either way, the pattern is clear. When a hunter disappeared under mysterious circumstances, it was rarely chalked up to accident alone. And this brings us back full circle to the solitary figure on the ice, the one from our first scene. He might not have fallen through. He might not have missed his shot. He might have broken a rule no one wrote down, stepped where others would not, spoken a word meant to remain unspoken. In these stories, he becomes more than just a cautionary tale. He becomes a reminder that in the year 1000, danger wasn't always loud. Sometimes it simply waited in silence, because to hunt in that world wasn't just a profession, it was a pact, and not all pacts can be broken. Conclusion. The most dangerous job in the year 1000 wasn't one job at all. It was a spectrum of human daring, ingenuity, and desperation. From ice floes to volcanoes, salt mines to silent monasteries, people risked everything not for glory, but for survival, belief, or duty. These were the quiet professionals, those whose tools were spears, ropes, scrolls, or lungs full of borrowed air. Some faced enemies they could name, others confronted forces less tangible, collapsing tunnels, treacherous currents, vengeful landscapes. And through it all they endured. They worked without guarantees, often without names, and rarely with choice. But they left behind traces, Stories etched in stone, runes, oral tales, scattered artifacts. Their danger wasn't an exception, it was the cost of life itself. We may not face cliff edges or crater fumes today, but the courage to venture into the unknown still defines us. Whether with maps, missions, or bare hands, our boldest steps forward have always come with risk.